I'd like to take one talk to discuss fingerings. And it's such a big subject and covers so much area. There's no real way to go into the kind of detail here that you need when working through any piece of music. But I thought maybe I could find some basic principles that I believe in and share those with you, just as a kind of a guideline. And the first principle that I think is really important is that you develop the habit of trying and at least imagining or knowing of as many possibilities for fingerings as you can possibly imagine. As cellists, because the size of the fingerboard, we don't have as many options for fingerings as violinists do. You can cover more territory with the hand. But still, there are so many different ways to play a passage, and I often wonder when I hear people play how many other options they may have ever investigated or thought of. Even if you take something like the opening of the C major suite, how many different ways could you finger that scale? Let's try some. You can go on and on and on and on forever. I could probably sit here for 20 minutes and do that and maybe not repeat the fingering. So really, take all your passage work, all your pieces, and look at all the different ways you could do it. Sometimes something as simple as or this makes a difference in the way something sounds. And maybe for your hand or for your conception of the piece, maybe one will work much better than another. Okay, the next thing that you should try to do with fingerings, in keeping an idea of respect for the principle of imitation of a human voice, which is something we can do so well in the cello, fingerings need to be what I call coherent. In other words, they need to replicate the sound of singing as much as possible. And singers, when they go from one interval to the next, try not to break the voice or break the line. For example, we traditionally play the Beethoven A major on one string. There's a reason for that, because if you go to the D string, you have a break. And I call that a lack of coherence in the phrase. Now, it can be done. But where do you go from here? That's also incoherent. This isn't. That is coherent. So if you're going to use a more coherent fingering method, all kinds of things come into play when you talk about coherence. Where you shift, in general, try to keep as much of a phrase on one string as possible if you want it to be seamless, and change strings in an appropriate place. For example, here, or Beethoven actually breaks the phrase in the music. So go for coherence. You've seen sometimes very young cellists play fingerings like this. Very simple. Use all your fingers. Remember, you've got 4 of them, and plan ahead so that you don't find yourself using one finger for something, but rather playing out the hand. Playing out the hand is also a pretty good principle to remember if you have to play something fast. For example, the next scale. Playing out the hand means using all the available fingers. So that you have 1, 2, 1, 2, 4, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. Instead of 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2. You can do 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2, but it will slow you down, and you have to shift much more often. So when you need rapidity in your passage work, play out the hand. The other thing you can do if you want to play cleanly is to shift on the half steps. For example, I played before this fingering, and then I did shifting between the B and the C. It's going to be cleaner than where I shift the whole step. Try as I may, still hear it much more than it's just much more acceptable. So when you want the passage work to be clean, try to always shift on the half steps. The other thing you can do to clean up, because we have to be clean on the cello, because if we tend to shift too much, there's a lot of glissandos between notes, is to use extensions. For example, from here, if it's possible, stretch back to the C sharp rather. You might want that for musical reasons, but you already have one big shift there. Perhaps that's a little cleaner. You might try that. One more clean shift and extend. Or, but never, that's another principle. Don't shift twice in a row. Never sounds good. Finally, use your strong fingers for the notes that have to be strong. In other words, when you come to the end of the first movement of the Beethoven A major, you wouldn't use the fourth finger. Naturally use the third. So don't use the weaker finger when you need a note that sounds really strong and really healthy. That's all I wrote down. I could go on. But remember, the principles of fingering have influence both artistically, and they also have to be really practical. The two things I think need to be in equal balance. And the first thing you can do to get there is take your sonatas and your concerto parts, get rid of the fingerings from the editors, start to think about yourself, be your own boss, and be responsible for your own decisions.